So, Simon Tov Yudalad Shalei La'arev Ela L'Daita. You can only make an Eruv Techumim for someone with his knowledge. You can't do it against his will. Says the Mechaba, Ein Ma'arv Eruv Techumim La'adam Ela L'Daita. You can only do an Eruv Techumim for someone with his knowledge, with his consent. Shema Eina Reitz La'arev. Because maybe he doesn't want to be restricted and to go in the direction where you've made the Techum. Chutz Mibnei Ubita HaKtanim. The only exceptions to this rule are minor children. Even if they're not somech on your shulchan, they are bound by your tchum. And also a shifcha or never knani. Even if these ktanim or the shifcha, the knani, never knani, protest, they don't want to be included in your eruv. And even if they make another eruv, ain't a klum. That doesn't do anything because they are bound by your Eruv. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Katan Aleph by Orach Kadei Shelo Lahafsed Alidei Zeh Ho Apayim Shebei Vasheni. Because if you're over here, you've got 2,000 numbers each way, and therefore if they make an Eruv Techumim for you somewhere else, then it restricts you.
For the ear.
Sorry?
If you make it for the ear, let's say I don't want it.
No, but you can't make it against their will. You can only when it says you can't make it for the whole town, only with the consent of every single person.
So what happens if I don't want it?
So then you say I don't want it.
What?
You say I don't want it.
Okay.
So you just say I'm not bound. I can't make an Eruv Techumim to include other people against their wishes. So if I make an Eruv Techumim for this shul, and I include you, it's meaningless because I can't do it against your will. Yeah. It's got to be with your consent. That's exactly what he's saying. Yeah. It says. Yeah, but Orach they should have to the Hapayim Shebei Vasheni. Yeah, maybe call him and then I'll just do it online. Shekadei should have to the Hapayim Shebei Vasheni. Yeah, call him and then I'll just put the phone in front of me. So he shouldn't lose out the 2,000 amas. Shelasad Beisa Commission is by El Simon Tovches. Afilu Einem Smuchin. Vatam Zor Chaim on the Ein Ma'arvin El Diva Mitzvah. And the reason is you can only even for children who are not soimech on your shulchan, but if they're ktanim, they're bound by your eruv. And the reason is and therefore you can always do it for them. Yeah, okay. And by the way, the Chaznish says, if you look at footnote 1, Chaznish Kosov shekivin sheyochel la'arev bal karcham nechshav hu the ma'arev hama'arev v'loihem v'yochel la'arev mishaloi ve'in tzorech lezakas lahem. Yeah, mashma shetzorech lezakas lahem. Mikol mokum kol echol adeh tzorech lekol echad mozen beisudas. So even if I include my minor children, I've got to still do mozen shtei sudas for each of them. We'll see a bit more about that in a minute. Okay, weiter in Haknani Pnei Yodin Ki Yoda. Yeah, because the Evaknani, it's just like an extension of you almost. It continues the Mechaba. Avul B'nai Ubitei HaGedolim, but adult children, Afilu Smuch Mal Shulchan, even if they're relying on you for Parnasa, they're somech on your Shulchan, V'avda V'shivchoso HaIvriim, and Jewish Avodim and Shvachis, V'ishtei, and your wife, they need, you've got to only do it with their consent. And if you made an Eruv and they were silent, and they heard you're making an Eruv and they were silent, and they didn't protest, then Yotzim Be'eruvai, we say Shtika Kaidah, we assume that they're happy with your Eruv Techumim. But if they protest, or they make their own Eruv Techumim, Ein Eruvai Eruv Lohem. Their Eruv is no good. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Katan Dalet V'Shama V'Shasku. The Mislaman is Rat so Haev V'Shivcha Liyad Adonehem. The Evedivri and the Shivcha Knan is V'Chein Habonim La'Avien V'Ish L'Das Baila. We assume that they are willing to participate in the Eruv Techumin. V'Afilu Lo Yodiyam Mino Eruv Ad Shetech Shach Gam Keimanin. Even if you tell them about it afterwards, after it became dark, that also works. They're bound by your Eruv. After Bisman Kinyas Eruv who Ben Hashmoshes, even though the trigger point was a bit earlier, was Ben Hashmoshes, Mishum the Mistoma Oimet Eruv Liskaim. Because the Eruv is going to last, and therefore we assume that they were happy with your Eruv that they made, and they're going to be part of it. But if they protest, as soon as they hear you said, I made an Eruv and you're including my Eruv Tchum and I put out Mozen Shtei Sudas for you as well, then if they protest there and then they can pull out of it. La fuke sheshosku v'achkach mochu. But if they are silent and then later they protest, it's no good. Lo mahani mechalson, when their protest is no good. The tek of keshosku, because as soon as they're silent, hayu have hayu, that's considered a haidah. Shemaskimim lamaisov, that they agree to your actions. V'niskayim ha'eruv, and therefore they're included in the eruv. This is only when they heard from when it got dark and they were silent. But if they heard about it in the afternoon, on Friday afternoon, and then they were silent, they protest later, then then they're not included in it. Yeah, no, just their participation in it. Yeah. Because in the afternoon, Friday at lunchtime, they said, right, you're going to be included in my Eruv, how about that? And they said, great. And then they changed their mind, and at the time of Ben Hashmoshes, they protest. That's the point of when they can protest still, and that's okay. They can change their mind. Oishe Eruv. This is going on. What is going on? If they make their own Eruv, says Mishabura, even if they do it afterwards, after I made my Eruv, that's a very strong protest for Holchin Lois, and therefore their Eruv that they made is going to count, and therefore they can carry 2,000 numbers from wherever they made their Eruv. Okay, so just to summarize, Aleph, what have we said? That you can only make an Eruv Techumim with the consent of another person. You can't do it against their will, because it's a chayv for them. They're bound by where they can walk, and therefore they've got to actively, they've got to buy into what they're doing. But your junior children, your binoy or bitay haktanim or nevet knani, they are bound by your eruv regardless, but not adult children. Okay, so that which takes us on to Sif Beis. Cotton ben sheishonim epochus, a child less than 6 years, 6 and less, yotzi be'eruv imay, will be bound by his mother's Eruv. And there, you don't need to do Mozen Shtei Sudas for that young child. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sif Kotzen Zayin. But once you've entered the 7th year, then you've got to include him separately. You've got to put Mozen Shtei Sudas for a child who is in his 7th year, i.e. 6 years and a day. That until 6 years and inclusive, he will be bound, included in his mother's Eruv. Whether or not the father is in town. The Rabbi, however, sides with many poskim. If his father is in town, even if the child is as young as 4 or 5 years old, i.e. 5, when he's he matures more slowly, then the child will not be included in the mother's Eruv, because already at 4 or 5 and the father's in town, he's less connected and drawn to his mother, following her in all her aspects, unless there was a zikui for him. They need to be included properly. Because until that moment, koruch achareha uchagufadomya, he is bound to the mother, and she's like, the child is like part of the mother. For after ein ma'arvnel dvar mitzvah, and even though we say that you only do an eruv tchumin for dvar mitzvah, for cotton lav bar mitzvahs and the child is not really a bar mitzvah yet. Since this young child is not able to really function properly without his mother, yotze immo, he goes with her. But if the mother doesn't do the Eruv, she doesn't go out with the father's Eruv. But nearly the afim zika olav aviv gam kein leman. Even if the father was mazakeh for the child, it doesn't help. Because until that child, when the child is very young, it's the company of his mother that he desires. And she wasn't part of the father's Eruv, and therefore the young child, will be bound to the mother's Eruv and not the father's Eruv. Okay, that's the end of Tov Yud Daled, and the main point is that you can only do an Eruv Techumim with the consent of another person, because it's a chayv. The exceptions are very b'nai b'tzah ketanim, or a shifcha or a nevet knani, etc. But other people, you can't do it against their will. Okay, that's Tov Yud Daled.